Hopefully Claire will know to do the online stuff.
Yeah, so I won't do housekeeping for online. Okay, you ready? Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Art House talk. Welcome to those online and in person in the Art House. This week's talk is by the artist April Lin. This is the third in the series. We've previously had excellent talks by Sam Metz and Barry Sykes. And then coming up, we have Joseph Walsh on November the 29th. We have the Creative Wellbeing Roundtable, which is on December the 13th. And that's with Sam Metz, Joseph Walsh, April Lin, and is chaired by Claire Hilton as well. Oh, and Nori Ashry, sorry, thank you. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. April's going to talk for about 40-ish minutes, and then we're going to have a comfort break, and then we'll come back for discussions and some questions. So if you have questions, please take a note of them while April's talking, and then we'll have a conversation afterwards. So, okay, so my name's Lucy Sames. I am a associate lecturer here at Worcester on the Fine Art and with psychology. And I just want to introduce April today. So I first came across April's work perhaps about a year ago. I think we were discussing just now how that might have come about. We're not entirely sure, but I know of April's work through sort of mutual collaborators and artists as well. So, and I've always been really interested in the intersection of queer ecology and care in April's work. And particularly, I think this comes through in the work tree that we're going to be that I think April's going to show today as well. And I think this is a good way for us to kind of think about the kind of profound lessons that we can learn from the kind of queerness and collaborative or cooperative practices or processes of the more than human world. So this, I think, will come through in what April's going to talk about today. So yeah, we look forward to hearing April talk through that. So just to read a little bit of April's bio. So April is an interdisciplinary artist and independent curator, investigating image making and world building as sites for the construction, sustenance, and dissemination of coexistent yet conflicting truths. Working across moving image, performance, creative computing, and installation, they dream and explore and critique and fret and catastrophize and imagine and play for a collective remembering of forgotten truths, of forgotten pasts, for a critical examination of normalized presence, and for a visualizing of freer futures as, of course, imagined from the periphery. So with that beautiful bio that you've written, can we welcome April Lin? So,
thank you. I got it. Yeah, thanks so much for reading out my own bio to me. I feel like whenever that happens, I'm like, oh yes, that is me. That was me. But I'm very happy to be here at the Art House tonight in Worcester, and just to talk a bit about how care is quite central to my practice. And it will become a bit clearer in the talk, but I'm eventually dividing it into care conceptually, care process-wise, and care practice-wise. And yeah, we'll just take it from there. Just a bit about me. My name is April Lin, and I use they, them pronouns. And I was actually trained in sociology. And I've actually given up a bit on academia since, but my social scientific training still remains quite relevant to the work that I do and really underpins a lot of the kind of investigations and explorations that I'm still interested in. Is everyone okay as well with like volume and my speaking volume? Okay, cool. Very good to know. And yeah, it was quite a difficult few years in sociology, but I'm very happy for the kind of direction that it's put me on in terms of understanding the things that I'm interested about. Here I've written like semi-self-taught because I've never actually gone to art school. I had my first crit like 2 months ago, which was actually quite terrifying and part of this fellowship that I was doing. But whilst I've also taught myself a lot of things, I kind of want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of my learning has come from other sources, like my friends, my peers, YouTube tutorials, workshops that I've been in. So my education isn't very formal, but has come from elsewhere other than me as well. But you know, there's been a lot of experimentation along the way, and I don't want to discount that. But yeah, I'm interested, as Lucy kind of mentioned, in how art can function as this kind of vessel and a method for allowing us to visualize worlds that can't or might be able to exist beyond, this version of our current reality. And it's very important to me that these worlds are built from a marginalized perspective, where, for instance, like queerness or race or class or disability get to kind of exist and take up space, and where the kind of power dynamics and the structures that have led to these labels to exist are dealt with, but also where these perspectives get to exist beyond that label. So, for instance, something that I might think about quite a lot is, what does like a queer story or a queer history look like when it's not defined against cis heteronormativity? Because it's not that queerness hasn't existed for a long time, but also only, pinning it against normative structures takes away a lot of that kind of nuance, one could say. Yeah, and as Lucy also mentioned a bit, I'm quite interested in relationships between like humans and more than humans, and by more than humans, I mean, like plants or vegetables or trees or cats or lizards, but also say like rivers or mountains or landscapes or this water bottle or this computer and all the minerals that make up this computer, and just kind of interested in shifting our awareness to consider all the different things that we are in relation with, and just seeing humans or like human society as nodes in a bigger network of beings, and trying to understand like when we really tap into what that means, that we're part of these systems and these ecologies that of which, say, human society or capitalism are quite a big part of, but only still a part of. What does that mean in terms of approaching like the ecological crisis? What kind of different portals or pathways might that open up once we're able to really step outside a very like human-centered way of seeing ourselves or seeing the world? So those are some of the things I'm interested in. Up until quite recently, my practice was mostly moving image-based. So here are some stills from my earlier films. But yeah, I've always been quite interested in deconstructing this kind of stable frame of the cinema. How like that rectangular frame has this kind of claim, to like a reality, or, what is inside it is what's real in that cinematic world. So I think from the beginning I was quite interested in breaking that down, and sometimes, including lots of things layered on top of each other, or kind of wiping away one layer of reality and then showing another one underneath, and seeing what that might mirror in terms of like the kind of relationship to reality that the viewer then is taken on, or that we go on together. And I think there was also a bit of mixing here between more like lens-based cinema, so stuff that's shot on like a camera, versus things like found footage or things that are like take place in more digital kinds of worlds. And again, kind of contrasting these different languages and these different techniques to see what kind of worlds might come from there. These are stills from some of my more recent films. Both were made in 2021, so last year. And I've continued this interest in like cinema as a way of exploring world building, and specifically here more thinking about like multi-species, speculative kind of expansion of realities. So this has also come in relation to me using a lot of 3D animation or CGI, depending on what you call it. I think the most well-known software is probably Blender, but I use Cinema 4D. But I am quite interested in using CGI as a kind of technique that lends itself to, sculpting and creating worlds and giving life to stories or beings or realities or deities that can or could not exist, or that exist in other ways. And I'm less interested in using CGI as a way to animate like hyper-realistically or photorealistically. Not to say that that's a bad thing, not at all, and that requires a lot of skill and a lot of patience, but rather I'm not, so invested in kind of reaffirming this reality. I'm more interested in kind of expanding and destabilizing and seeing what kind of things we can make that, both look very real, but also quite unreal. And yeah, the two stills on the left are from my film called Tree, and we'll be looking at that a bit later down the talk. And even more recently, I think this year, I've begun expanding more into like performance and installation, and thinking about these as more embodied or material or live ways of growing those worlds and of inviting people into the worlds that I create, especially now, as we all know, I'm sure there's a lot of screen time, and the screen, even though it's a very potent kind of interface for different realities or different things to meet, I think it's nice to be able to offer people something that can be felt in their body or that can be felt more like with their senses. So I'm trying to bridge my video practice with, performance and installation. And I've also been working a bit more with like digital art or new media art, and we'll also be talking about a work in progress or upcoming project later in this talk as well. But yeah. So how is care central? For me, it's just made sense to divide it into this kind of system, and to kind of conceptualize the ways that care can be manifested or acted upon or received. And so the system would be, concept, process, and practice. And of course, these areas, they all overlap. The concept or the what of the project, the what that I'm interested in is, of course, in a mutual relationship with the process or the how of how I'm studying it or interacting with it or engaging with it. And all of that is quite inextricable in terms of how it sits in my own practice. But, sometimes, whilst I still think caring and practicing care is a very basic and fundamental thing in some sense, it can be very vague and sometimes overwhelming, I think, to translate it into like a professional context. It's like, how do I actually embody care in my work as an artist? So this is just a little system I've made up to make things a bit easier for myself at times. And yeah, in terms of concept, I think for me fundamentally that would mean just approaching my subject matter with care and really asking these kinds of questions like, why does this matter? And how is this relevant? And who is affected, and how am I affected? And answering these questions, both intellectually using like different concepts or different ways of thinking that I have learned about or come across, but answering them emotionally as well. One thing I mentioned, that I'm trained in sociology, and then I was going quite heavily into that route. I was doing like a research assistant position at a university, and then I was like, actually, I can't do this anymore because even though I'm really interested in the things I'm learning, I feel like if I write these papers or do these studies, I feel really detached from this matter at hand, and I feel like this knowledge is produced in a way that makes me feel really far away from the thing that I really care about. So it's like, maybe I will think about becoming an artist. I'd been making some films already, kind of for myself, but then I was like, maybe I can just share them with more people and see how that goes. And now I'm here today. So all that to say that that's really taught me, I think, how important it is for me to really stay connected to the things that I'm studying or the things that I'm investigating or the things that I want to share. And yeah, even though I work largely in a way that's very research driven, and that's based a lot on, different kinds of questions or concepts that I want to kind of pry open or kind of dissect a bit. Keeping these questions in mind has been really helpful, especially when there's like infinite things to be interested in and like infinite ways that you can study them and just infinite ways that you can really get to grips with something. Something like this keeps me quite like grounded and anchored in terms of what is it that I'm actually doing and why does it actually matter. And I think just trying to trust, the fact that what I'm doing is important and will ripple out to some sense. Is just thinking about why and how does this want to ripple in this specific way. I think I've also mentioned a bit somatically and politically and spiritually there, because I'm really trying to bring like my body into this investigation process as well, and thinking about like, how does my body feel when I'm reading about this certain thing? Am I like really clenched in my jaw? Am I like really tight in like my stomach? Or am I like really relaxed and feel like I can really absorb these thoughts and these ideas, and paying attention to how I feel? And similarly, like politically, you know, how does me studying or contributing to this body of knowledge, like what does that actually mean in terms of the ways that information is circulated and produced in society today? And spiritually, I mean, I think this ties in a lot with the world building interest for me. But yeah, just thinking about what it really means to want to create other worlds that of course lean on existing theories or existing practices already, but want to kind of rebuild them and reinvent them in today, you know, in today, in the present, and in the here and now, what the implications of that all are. So yeah, I want to kind of show a work where care was really part of the concept from the very, very beginning. And this is Tree. And I mentioned it, I showed a still from it earlier, and yeah, I'll show you the film, and I'll let you guys sit with it a bit. Maybe it would be good if we could dim the lights, but if we can't, that's also okay. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll watch it, and then I'll share the synopsis with you after, I think. We'll do. I'll let you arrive at your seat.
I don't remember when this was all proposed, but my roots remember. My name isn't Gladys Maniora. My name's Tree. I refuse to be called that which my creatures projected onto me. I'm more than what my makers crafted me for. A desperate last hope to cling on the rotting vestiges of sense-making. That's what Gladys Maniora signals to me. Gladys, disaster. Maniora, things continuing to improve. Language system, scientific naming, categorizing, distancing, removed. Assigned by scientists, made by the top. Spores were taken from the bodies of my ancestors and tested, pressured, fused, in a lab to make most future-proof the hardiest of all. That's why I'm here. I was literally destined to be resilient, a shield at best and a carrying pack at worst, to let humans who wish to continue their lives as normal can do so. No, I don't call myself Gladys Maniora anymore. I call myself Tree, to herald the free beings that I am also. Respect the forms of my existence that are meaningful to me. I've been studied and inspected to bits already. I can teach you in my own terms. It will probably be the truest account you ever get anyways, because it's my own. From my ancestor, the Dutch assigned to name Quercus Rover, I have inherited a strong, wide root system. Like theirs, my roots will stretch over miles and miles wide and deep, holding roots with my comrades' undergrowth. Most humans will never know it when they are being created by us. With these, we're going to steady the ground. We won't let it slip away during storms, tides, or floods. But make sure you have a place to land when you fall. For my ancestor in the Mediterranean Cyprus, the assigned name Persis Bermudas, I have inherited the importance of standing tall. My branches extending over me, so as to shed weight that might otherwise collect in my canopy, entrapping me. Should any fires look at me, they will have less to recover. Their wisdom to collect and wait sits in my leaves, each of which waxing underbelly is structured so as to treasure every drop of moisture that seeps into me. Should I let go of the leaf, it will fall, dense with wetness, heavy, into a compact, cooling bed on the floor, a soothing balm for hot and dry days. For my ancestor, the Scots pine, assigned name Pierce Sylvestris, I have inherited the gift of treasuring relationships. You see, my relations are part of me, and I a part of them. I'm thinking about the lichens, the mosses, and the fungi, my neighbors, comrades, and friends, and when I help me too. We purify each other's breath. We warn each other of approaching danger and disease. We share and prepare food. It's mutual. It's one's benefit equaling the other's. We share our vessels freely, the vessel of life, and our physical vessels on this planet too. It does take a toll on you, this hardwiring of defense into your very body. I'm young. 19 Earth years is only 7% of my predicted lifetime, but I've already had to say many goodbyes to those who cannot keep up under this pressure, whose spirits were made to thrive in luscious, tranquil places, not survive this disastrous, ravenous, cowardly mist. Tree Lungwood, assigned name Lavaria Pulularia, used to be a steady neighbor of ours. Through all weathers, you would find them across a gradient of bright green to white. The algae, fungus, cyanobacterium's three-way partnerships were inspiring to witness. When the air started getting dirty and smokier, it started pulling our way, growing smaller and smaller. And one day I awoke and they were gone. No one had seen them disappear, but they had ceased to exist. There isn't one day where I would undo the lessons passed on to me. Though difficult, my ancestors have traveled too far for my hurts to go untransformed into anything but knowledge, skill, and wisdom. Will they have perished for nothing? Will everyone have hurt and lost and been disappeared for nothing? No, it can't be so. Please, don't take us for granted. We're always adapting, evolving, trying on our ability to learn. But every day is being pushed to new limits, and I see that you are tired too. Rest with us, sit with us, be with us. We are always on the brink, but it's never too late to reverse the engines which seek to drive us apart. Render you indifferent, static, all-consuming, and me, static, collateral, weight-bearing. While there's still a possibility to change, I urge you to take it. I can see the tree in you, and you will see the humanity in me. And eventually, we'll turn the tide together. We want to, we must, for there is no other way. Say hi to the next tree you see, for me, and show them who treasures them.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, so that was my film Tree. I'll read the synopsis out. So, Tree 2021, in collaboration with ecologist Dr. Nalini Nadkarni, artist filmmaker April Lin presents Tree, a speculative documentary which imagines a new species of tree based on scientific literature on plants and climate hardiness. Their hybrid forms and body parts, a patchwork amalgamation of different tree types, this tree is a climate adaptive response, a life form born out of resilience and hope. As the spirit inhabiting the tree emerges to converse with the viewer, they share with us their experiences of ecocidal generational trauma, urging us to reflect around the ways all the beings on the planet are deeply interlinked and to honor our collective responsibility towards one another. Using a blend of 3D animation, found footage, and a musical score based on data sonification, Tree uses the speculative to recast the ecological crisis, asking why is this important from a multi-species and affective gaze. So I'm just laughing because I feel like this whole talk so far just touches on this in different ways. I was like, wow, it's very much a constant. But yeah, so, this film came out of Sheffield Docfest, which is a film festival that focuses mainly on documentary films, usually more conventionally documentary films that are like more journalistic, or someone has gone somewhere to film something and there's like a more fact-based, I guess, story to tell. But they wanted to pair up like artists and scientists to work together to make something together. So I hit up this ecologist whose work I'd been following for a while called Nalini Nadkarni, who is a canopy ecologist and mainly works with canopies and trees and talking about the specific kinds of ecosystems that exist only in canopies. And I said to her, I would like to make a speculative film about a tree that doesn't exist. Sorry, give me a sec. It's just auto-playing my own work. Yeah, I was like, I want to make a film about a tree that doesn't exist. And then she was kind of like, yes, but how? And then after many, many months of conversation, we eventually were able to kind of fuse our different ways of like navigating this topic, because for her, she wasn't really used to basically thinking more with imagination. And it was just kind of like this tree, it's, you know, fused between these three specific tree species that are, it's impossible for them to produce offspring together. It's just like, April, that would never work. And then I had to be like, yes, I know, but then what if? And then like after a few months, you're just slowly just getting used to being able to like make claims about the world that aren't like proven in that kind of way. But then I also kind of had to approach her side of things because I think like connecting with nature for me and for many other people comes quite naturally. But I had really avoided learning their like Latin names and like scientific things about them because I was just like, you know, that comes with a lot of very problematic history. And I was like, I don't know, I feel like I'm quite happy to know this plant based on like how it feels in my hands and how it smells. Like I don't need to know what your scientific name is. I don't need to know the specific type of leaves and what they're called by scientists. But then when doing research for this, I read a lot about the specific tree types that tree is made out of. And I had to kind of come to peace as well with like scientific framing of the natural world and understanding it as flawed and problematic, but in a sense like very rich and very has a lot to give on its own. And it's kind of about how you approach that literature rather than writing it off, which I had been doing. And essentially wanting, to talk about the climate crisis from the perspective of a non-human. And I think a lot of the climate crisis is spoken about a lot from the perspective of humans, like how is our way of living and our, our lifestyle going to be threatened, and the different kinds of compromises that humans need to make. And I was always just thinking about like, what does it feel like for say in this case, a tree who I'm sure has lost a lot of different kind of kin and a lot of different loved ones and, other beings that they cared for, but, which we don't really give voice to in this way. So that was kind of the thought experiment that I was going through, and maybe how, in one sense, care was extended into the concept. But likewise, there was also a lot of care between me and Nalini, my scientist collaborator, because I think it is quite easy to make these kinds of like artist-scientist collaborations where you just go like, okay, I have some scientific research, let's just use art to like visualize it. Maybe make like a video that describes this kind of research, and it's a bit more of a flatter interpretation, I guess. But we really took a lot of time and care to really try to understand like how we each differently think about the same thing. And it's I don't know, it was quite fun in a lot of ways, but also quite frustrating. And maybe some of the frustrating aspects came from, because a lot of what Tree experiences is, of course, like I wrote the film, it comes from my own lived experiences to some extent. So, if you remember, they like disidentify from their Latin name. They say, don't call me that anymore, my name is Tree. And when me and Nalini were talking about it, I was like, maybe one way you Nalini, can help me understand what that, or can help, something that can help Nalini understand what that means is likening it to me and my like disidentification from my assigned gender. So I was assigned female at birth, which I don't really identify with anymore, but I'm still perceived as such often. And then there were a lot of conversations about like gender identity and how, we're all born into these like kinds of systems of how society works and how much are we able to kind of push back against them and question them, and how much energy does that require from the person who's trying to resist. And Nalini herself was just thinking a lot about, are we good? Oh, touchscreen, very good. Thinking a lot as well about, yes, how her like love and interest for like the natural world had been kind of sucked dry during her training as a scientist, and how she wasn't really allowed to say that, she cared about the trees that she was studying. She had to kind of frame it in this way, like they're interesting like this, and it's productive for us to study them because of this. But that it was also really freeing for her to be able to just say like, oh, this is something that genuinely matters to me, and that's enough for it to qualify as a piece of its own. Is there anything I have forgotten? Yeah, and I think this is probably the work where that kind of care in the concept has been maybe most straightforward, or, I care about these things and I want to make it from a caring place. And maybe or maybe not that's translated. But there's also Another work that I'm actually currently working on and which opens on the 1st of December at FACT Liverpool, which is a more like art, science, tech institution in Liverpool. And it's called The Earthly Realm is Out of Balance. Some recurring themes here. And yeah, it's something quite new for me. It's an interactive new media work that is also involves some speculation and some world building and a lot of care. But essentially it's a chatbot. So you might know about chatbots from like customer service interactions, and you have a problem and they'll just send you a chatbot and they're like, what do you need help with? And you say da 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 da, and then they just send you on your way, kind of. But this chatbot is like custom built with a programmer. So what essentially happens, it will be hosted on WhatsApp, and then you chat to this chatbot on WhatsApp. And as you're talking to them, you're actually talking to this character from this other world that I've written about and like visualized through animation, this character. And this character is this guardian of this cosmic library of different knowledges and practices and traditions around ancestry. But this library has fallen into like disuse, and they need like your help, you, the user's help, to kind of like revive it. So you're kind of taken on this journey as you chat with them, and you're given like different prompts to think about different things about like your relationship to ancestry and how much do you think about it and how comfortable do you feel like talking about it and like what do you really care about it, and just different things. And as you answer it, you're taken down different paths. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure game with this chatbot on WhatsApp. And yeah, there's been a lot of, I would say, care interwoven into this too, because this library that this person is guarding, I've kind of built that in the game, in the WhatsApp chatbot universe, pulling from different like resource materials or just different research, different podcasts, different films, etc., and putting quotes in so that people can explore it. And it's been a lot of trying to kind of tend to those perspectives or that knowledge and not like twist maybe the author's original intention by putting it in this library. Just understanding that like someone has put a lot of work into writing and producing this knowledge. I'm now saying that it takes place in this context that I've invented. What does it mean for me to take this person's work and put it like this? I want to like respect it, but I also want to be able to respect my own creative process, right? So also in preparing this library, I've also done a lot of interviews, or not a lot, I did 4 interviews, but they felt like a lot because they went really in depth. And they were with 2 people from Liverpool and 2 people from London, who all 4 of them have like a deeply like ancestral practice. And that has looked quite differently. One of them kind of approaches it through music and is like mixed race Chinese, and he plays and his family have all played like traditional Chinese instruments since he was a kid, and he can, for instance, feel his ancestors playing that same rhythms on this like drum as he plays it. But I also have friends engaging in like past life regressions, which if you know or don't know is just like different facilitated like meditations in a sense that allow you to see what lives you have lived before your current life. So different ways of approaching ancestry, but all of which are very personal and very intimate. So I had a lot of these interviews, which of course involve a lot of care as well, because I don't want to be, just like taking these people's stories and again, putting them into my own context. I want to make sure that they feel like they get to speak about ancestry on their own terms, and that they have, kind of an agency and an understanding of what their story is going to play a bigger part of. And yeah, there's been a lot of like relationship building with those interviewees and just trying like check-in points. And I'll come to that a bit later when I talk about process, but just making sure that there's a lot of time and a lot of energy so that you're not like rushing through, just trying to get the material, but that it actually emerges more naturally on its own. And yeah, there's been a lot of care involved in writing the world that this character belongs to, because I also want to make sure that it's written from a place that isn't just, shock value or just reusing lots of tropes, but that will also resonate with people. So it's been quite a interesting project where I've tried out a lot of new techniques and a lot of new ways of approaching collaboration and making work. But ultimately, I think the questions that I showed you before around like, why does this matter and who is affected, those kinds of questions have kept me very anchored, whilst all this new shit is kind of around me. Oh yes, and of course, the most important thing is also that I've been trying to embed care for the user, the person who is chatting with the chatbot, because a lot of these questions can be quite intense. They can or cannot be quite intense, but they can be. And in that case, you know, if I'm guiding someone through a quite intimate path of reflection, I kind of want to make sure that people can go at their own pace and kind of guide their own learning as they feel able to. But at the same time, I also want to kind of push them into certain paths, right? So that it makes sense in the bigger kind of intention of the project that I'm doing. So it's also been this kind of learning process of how to facilitate these kinds of conversations and these kinds of spaces for learning in a way that's like a little bit firm, and there's a little bit of like, I want to make you a little bit uncomfortable or push you into new territory, but I don't want to just like fling you and make you think about intergenerational trauma and things that happened to your ancestors 10 years ago, which can be very intense, I think. And yeah. And I think partly also the fact that it's hosted on WhatsApp for me comes out of a bit of like, maybe my inner utopian is just like, you know, technology comes with a lot of stuff these days. You know, more recently, Elon Musk bought Twitter, and that's been a whole saga. But just thinking about how even technology or apps that are owned by like big data, multinational corporations can still be used somehow as like vessels of, you know, more intimate conversations or places where like genuine learning can be experienced. So that's an experiment for me as well. Yeah, so that's more the concept bit. And now I'll talk a bit about the process bit. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I already mentioned in the concept bit, so you'll see that these things really do overlap so much. But for me, maybe the fundamental is to really care for collaborators and audience and also myself and the lives of perspectives of those involved at every stage where possible. And yeah, it comes a lot with, I think, learning about myself and learning about my own ways of working and my own boundaries professionally and like emotionally, and thinking about what kind of support I need. And this is very much an ongoing journey, something that's, I sometimes think I've arrived at some sort of answer, and then, you know, I learn stuff and kind of become a slightly different person to who I was here. And then, you know, everything needs to be kind of reevaluated again. So it's very much an ongoing journey. But a key tool through which I really learned a lot about how to embed care in the process is through an Access Writer, which I'm not sure if you guys know about. Maybe yes, maybe no. It's a no from John. But it's a document, and it's a document that outlines your access needs or whatever other needs. And I have different Access Writers for different purposes. So I have ones that I send to like organizations or curators or producers, people who are kind of like bringing me on to something bigger than me. And I have one that I share with my collaborators, which in a sense is me bringing them onto something that I'm leading. And I was thinking we can maybe take a look at one of my Access Writers quickly, just to see. But, well, is that okay? That's probably still quite small, right? Let me see. Maybe not. All right, we can just go through this a bit. But yeah. So I've divided into some sections, and here I have a communication section, and here I'm just talking about how I really appreciate clear communication. Please tell me if there's any dates I need to know, stuff about fees and budget. Maybe you've already experienced this, maybe not, but sometimes people don't tell you these things, and you're like, I would like to know how much I'm being paid for something. Not later after I've done it, but before. It seems like very basic, but stuff like this will outline, you know, what is your basic, and then people are able to come to you, you know. Expectations around like deliverables, wardrobe. So that's stuff about communication. stuff about when I'm available for communication. Sometimes people hit you up on the weekends and they want a response then and there, and then I'm just like, no, my weekends are my weekends. So this kind of then also creates a bit of a buffer for me to be able to chill and rest a bit. Some transparency in communication. You know, I'll touch on this later, but people have different communication styles. So this is just my access writer talking about how I prefer things to be. And sometimes people have access needs that conflict with that, and that's okay because there's been, as much as possible, a conversation beforehand just talking about people's different needs, right? Stuff about my artist name, having to include my Chinese name as well, and stuff here about, you know, I would like a quiet room if possible, or, you know, if there are costs, then I would like to not have to pay for my own travel to go somewhere to work. So different things. Yeah. And stuff here, I think this is quite important for me at least, and might be important for you, where I just outline some kind of basic things that make me feel like safe and comfortable in like a working relationship. Stuff around like, you know, if I get misgendered, what should people do? Or if someone says something racist about me and I am not there, what should people do? Or if I am there and I don't correct them, what should people do? So just different kinds of like safeguarding things that are happening, like more mentally, but also, you know, socially and like politically. Some that I like to have some breaks during Zoom meetings, and I prefer some check-ins, and then there's some information as well, and dietary requirements that I like oat milk. So as you can see, it's quite like a mixed bag, and people will write their access writers in different ways, and there's no right way of doing so. But yeah, I think I want to really outline that this document is not to create like a situation where things are black and white and where it's like, oh, I've stated my needs, oh, you are unable to meet them, therefore you're bad organization and a bad institution. But rather it's about like, I've stated these things, it makes it more possible for the other party to like know what I want and to know what I expect. They can then tell me like, oh, April, that's not possible. Then we can work out some sort of middle ground maybe from there, or maybe then I will know like, okay, this person can't provide me with a fee. They expect me to do unpaid labor. For me, that's a no, right? Rather than me waiting around for them to maybe pay me later. So it's kind of about setting up this environment where like transparency and honesty can be just the default from the beginning, and there's like a normalization around things that I need as an artist from the get-go, rather than things being discovered and learned about through trial and error, which is inevitable to some extent. I mean, if you work in the creative arts and the creative sector especially, but you know, just to kind of try to minimize miscommunication and to minimize any discomfort that might happen later with some more practical guidelines. Yeah, but as with any kind of more, you know, collaborative process, there's some grace. There needs to be some time for grace and for understanding that like people make mistakes, people sometimes don't know exactly like how to interact in certain situations, and that's okay. And it's kind of, you know, it's a give and take and a kind of thing that you figure out together. Something else I think, so access writers are quite a big part of how I work with collaborators. I usually write like easy read, like normal everyday English contracts for my collaborators, so they actually are able to read and like sit through the thing that I'm asking them to do, rather than send them this legal document that like is really boring and dry, and people then might not actually know what they're signing up for. And then in that contract, I will usually include my access writer and say, have you read this? So when they sign on, they say, I have read this. And in the contract, I will also ask the person signing for their access needs as well. So I'm just trying to open up a space where these things are spoken about. What else have I talked about? Oh yes, and content warnings. I mean, I'm not, because I also do some programming and curating work. And then I've worked with some institutions who are just like, we don't work with any content warnings. We think like the audience should be experiencing the work as it is, whether that be disturbing or not, or, you know, that's just how the work was meant to be. which I don't really agree with. I feel like you can still approach the work with some of this information in advance. But maybe similarly to the Access Writer, you know, a content warning isn't like some sort of one-size-fits-all solution that the audience will not be upset or not be disturbed. It's just that they have agency to perhaps not be there or to leave or to, you know, prepare themselves. And it's about giving people, I guess, choice or the ability to consent to be part of that experience. Yeah, another way I also like to include some care in the process is, where possible, to have some buffers for time and energy and money. I don't know if this is applicable now, but later, when you'll be doing work and maybe working on bigger projects, it just always does help to have a bit of extra time and extra energy and extra money. And it sounds very self-evident, but for me, I think one thing I've really had to learn is that I will really go to like 150% before on every project. I was like, I'm going to max out this budget that I have because I really want to like explore everything that I'm doing in so much detail. And I'm trying not to do that because it's not very sustainable, and it ends up exhausting myself a bit, and also my collaborators, who are kind of dragged into this, not dragged into, but you know, they end up having to go on this journey with me. So I'm trying to just leave a bit of space and a bit of cushion, and trying to plan so that I get like resting time and time to like digest and actually process the work that I'm doing. And just having some backup time as well in case things go wrong. And especially when working with a lot of tech, like video editing or animating, like there's always shit that goes wrong, sorry. But there's always stuff that goes wrong with tech, and that's stuff that's quite unpredictable. So just leaving my future, I'm trying to be kind to my future self and leaving some extra time for me to, you know, fall back on. Yeah, and I've included some resources here. I mean, maybe this presentation can be shared after, or I can send the links after. But Fact Liverpool have made like an easy read contract where things are very, again, it's like a template that anyone can use, where things are very spelled easy to read and very spelled out for you. And Unlimited, which is a disabled-led arts organization, have also a template for creating your own Access Writer. That can be quite useful if you've never written one. And yeah, finally, yeah, this is maybe the most like long-term question. With things like concept and process, that can be quite project specific. But with practice, that's something that's really overarching, and it can take, you know, the time span is years or decades. I'm not there yet, but years maybe. And I think for me, again, what really helps is like having these questions and like revisiting them every once in a while to really check in with myself and the answers that I'm providing. Maybe I can read them out. So just how do I want my art to interact with people? What conversations do I hope to engender or facilitate by my work? What does being an artist mean to me? How do I want to be an artist? What does success mean to me? What does success look like for me? How can my artistic practice lend itself to a wider building of support structures in my immediate project and the wider arts sector? And yeah, again, ongoing, just revisiting, seeing how and if my answers change. Because, you know, sometimes I want to be an artist who's like, you know, we need to talk about like climate change in a way that's like really looks at the issue more than these normal ways of thinking about it. And sometimes I'm like, I want to be an artist who can just pay rent and know that rent is sorted and I don't have to worry about that. Sometimes they coexist, sometimes one takes priority, and it's, you know, I think having a kind of awareness around what I want to do as an artist helps me lead the projects that I want to lead and kind of go in the direction I want to go. So yeah, I'm just going to end with this quote about support structures, which is to me what embedding care in my work, in my practice serves to do, or what the intention is. And I can read it out. Everything starts from this intuition, that what I define as support structures can release potential, and that support is not to be reduced to a reactive, symptomatic, and redeeming gesture, but through its uttering, we may be able to hear the unspoken, the unsatisfied, the late and the latent, the in process, the pre-thought, the not yet manifest, the undeveloped, the unrecognized, the delayed, the unanswered, the unavailable, the not deliverable, the discarded, the overlooked, the neglected, the hidden, the forgotten, the unnamed, the unpaid, the missing, the longing, the invisible, the unseen, the behind the scene, the disappeared, the concealed, the unwanted, the dormant. So yeah, I'll just let that sit for a while. And it's from this publication called Support Structures by Celine Condorelli, Gavin Wade, and James Langdon. Yeah, and that's it. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, April.
Thank you.
Should we have 5 minutes comfort break, or a short 5 minutes comfort break, and then come back for questions and discussion? Great. Yeah. There's one over there.
Actually, you're like,
Okay, welcome back. Again, thank you, April, for that great talk. Really enjoyed it. I have some questions to ask, but perhaps would anyone like to start? Anyone got any questions for April about their work? Anything they've said? Okay, we'll have a think about it. So, yeah, I mean, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I'm really interested in the kind of parallels that you draw between the networks of, well, something you hint at maybe is the networks of like fungi and plants and the kind of symbiotic relationship between trees and plants, which is mentioned in the film that you played. And I'm kind of interested in if you could say a bit more about how you, about that element of your film and how these kind of, symbiotic networks kind of can model, caring networks in our kind of lives and in our communities, as with this kind of, deeply interrelated and interconnected cross-species relation. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about that.
yeah, very good question. I mean, there's a lot of work being done these days, I think, on like mycelium networks and how great they are. I think specifically around fungi futures work. They're called fungi futures on Instagram. I actually don't know their real life name, but they're very, very great, and they research into specifically this question. And I think from, I feel like I'm one of many, many recent people now who are finding themselves really inspired by like how, simply put, different things can be organized in different methods, or with different kind of motives, or different things that in human society seem to have been ingrained as natural, wanting to like compete to be like the best, or wanting to like interact in a way that's transactional so that I get something from you or you get something from me. How learning from these other modes of being that we see, in like fungi or in mycelium, that can really remind us of different ways we could structure our own society to mirror that. And I guess quite a common parallel is, like mutual aid networks. Maybe most recently the ones that popped up during COVID, when there was like a big need for that, when, governments were really letting people down in terms of giving people the continued care and support that they needed, how quite organically these other ways of relating to people, your neighbors, strangers, friends, enemies, whatever, kind of formed, in a way that only had care, I think, as a kind of central concern.
Yeah. I think actually mentioning enemies is interesting because it's kind of care for people regardless of what they can offer back, which is like the, one of the principles of mutual aid is that, you give according to your ability to give, not what you will receive in return. So I think that's really important.
And I feel like that's quite important as well in terms of like understanding community and the way that community has been, in a sense, commodified in this present day. Like, at least to me, it feels like community is sold as this very like easy and frictionless concept. You just have people that you align with, and you just align together, and it's very nice. And that's really it. But actually, how community, I think, involves a lot of caring for people who maybe you don't even like, and you're kind of annoyed by them, and you would rather not really be with them, but you care for them, and you want them to exist well and exist happily and sustainably. And it's that kind of, I think, thread and that kind of work that maybe isn't really spoken about in a lot of more popular discourse around community building.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. I mean, I wonder how this actually relates to the work you were describing when you were talking about ancestors. So, how can what you think of as being a reasonably flat plane of a network, within communities, within even cross-species, how can that be kind of trans-temporal? So how can it relate almost like up and back to, the people who've come before you? How can they be, well, not how, I mean, they are like nodes in your in your network, you know, that kind of support and inform like your life choices, or your or act as kind of, you know, inspiring or caring kind of elements in your life. So yeah, I wonder if that's, I hadn't really thought of that before, and that's something that really came out of your when you were discussing ancestors before. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's good.
Yeah, I think ancestry is actually quite a difficult topic to make work around, I've realized, because everyone's relationship to that is really, really personal, but at the same time, it comes together with a lot of different political things and historical events. And the same historical event can really affect me or you differently depending on how, you know, our ancestors were situated in relation to that.
Yeah.
And so there's no kind of blanket way to speak about ancestry to everyone.
That's very true, yeah.
But it's been really amazing, I think, making this project and learning about the different ways that people have kind of been able to work through or try to work through the fact that like your ancestors give you a lot of gifts and like lessons, and they've done a lot for you to be here in this here now, but how that also comes a lot of pain and hurt and sacrifice, and how those things, they need to sit side by side, and you can't really talk about one without speaking about the other, which is unfortunately maybe what a lot of like political actors try to do when they, you know, a vision of ancestry is depicted as something very simplistic, often for more like nationalistic purposes maybe, I'm thinking here. Yeah. And now with like the rise of fascism, it's quite important maybe to speak from ancestry in a way that's very nuanced and very complex, and recognizes a lot of the violence that is transmitted, as well as a lot of the resilience, and how those are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, kind of the recuperation perhaps of those you know, ideas from the kind of potentially more kind of fascist sides of it, I guess. And I wonder if something I've written down while I was watching a film was naming, and like and so this kind of perhaps relates to what you were just saying about kind of maybe like wresting the idea of ancestry back from, you know, fascism. I wonder if you know, this sort of violent act of naming, which is so often related to, and as you talked about, is so often related to kind of violent colonial histories and kind of a power dynamic between the namer and the named. And but in your talk you mentioned kind of coming, I can't remember the phrase you used, but it was something like being at peace with the idea of naming, like you'd kind of gone almost like full circle and come back to that, to the possibility of like accepting that, you know, the Latin names for species are just, they're not, you know, it's not black and white, they're just kind of one way that these kind of plants and animals can be identified from each other in the natural world. It's not like the objective name that identifies and dictates their kind of role in the world. So because that seemed like a really important thing, particularly in your film. And you know, there are other ways to know things other than through their names, like you said, the kind of sensorial experience of a tree, for example, how it feels, how it looks, rather than, you know, how it's named.
I mean, maybe strangely, this coming to peace with like names and how it's inevitably also tied to a lot of different things. Maybe is related to me making peace with like language, and how language can never really like save you or be like the solution. It's just, you know, a tool like many, many other tools, or one approach like many, many other approaches out there. Maybe in a lot of like present day discourse, there's a lot of talk about language and like using the right kind of language at the right times and the right purposes, and that being a way forward in order to like, I don't know what, facilitate liberation. And of course that's still really important, and language holds a lot of power, but then maybe thinking about the fact that a lot of power is still very material and is like felt in the body, and whilst we can use language to name it, it doesn't really, just because we say something differently, might not actually change the way we or the way that we feel someone is treating you. Someone can still be very rude and dehumanizing, but say the nicest things to your face, right?
Yeah.
So I think kind of thinking about how, language as not like an ultimate savior or solution, and in fact putting that much onus on it maybe allows for a lot of other, like a lot of other systems to unfold and a lot of distraction, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Is there any questions for April? Anything?
I'm very nice. I will answer
very
your
nice.
question. It's very nice answers.
What inspired you to focus on something that's in an alternate reality as opposed to like day-to-day human life or something like that? Like, what's your main inspiration for that?
Okay, so let me just repeat the question.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, what's your name?
Rachel.
Rachel. So Rachel's asking, what inspired you to make your work around make your work around a kind of alternative world rather than basing it in the reality? Is that right? Yeah.
I have made work at some point that is very like this reality focused. I did a postgrad degree in documentary film, which is quite this world related, right? But I think for me, it didn't really seem to hit the spot in a sense. Like I felt like the thing I was producing was important, and people were like, responding very well, and it seemed to open up lots of conversations. And that was really great. But maybe I felt like, maybe for me it's also kind of like a coping mechanism of some kind. Like I want to be able to visualize another way out of the situation. Like whilst it's really important to understand what we have, I feel like there's a lot of work being done in that area already that I really respect and can learn from. And maybe for me what resonates like in the heart and in the soul is talking about like just imagining ways and trying to shift that whole thing elsewhere rather than trying to understand the like nuts and bolts of the inside, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I just really like this feeling of sharing work with people and kind of having guided them on this kind of journey together, even if it's just for a few minutes, to like imagining another way of being that maybe they hadn't really thought about before, and just seeing how that kind of can ripple out in different ways. No worries, thank you.
I mean, that's such an important tactic of, speculative fiction and, feminist fictions and things like that, isn't it? This kind of idea of like imagining other possible worlds which, are not subject to the power structures and hierarchies of this one, I guess.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
What do you think is the main motivator for your work, and what kind of gratification you get out of what you're making?
So what is the main motivation? I'm just repeating it for the people online, sorry. So what is the main motivation for your work, and what gratification do you get from it?
Ooh. Main motivation. Right now, yeah, both questions very good. I think I'm quite lucky at the moment and up until now in my career to have just worked with questions that I do genuinely find very interesting, and that like even if I wasn't working with them, I would be like reading about them or learning about them anyways. Now I get to make work and communicate and be part of that conversation, and it's gratifying is a very good question, because sometimes in the making process it's like not very gratifying. I'm often just like, oh, why am I doing this? And like I could just be, I don't know, maybe I should just work a 9 to 5, but I know I would never really actually like that. But it is just really gratifying, I think, to when the work is made, to be able to share it with people, and then genuinely to have like conversations around it and see like how your work, I think it's the same-ish kind of answer, but to see it like land with someone else who has a very different take on the same subject, different own life experiences that they're bringing to the thing that I'm bringing, and seeing where they go with that. Yeah, and that is very gratifying, especially when making films are a bit more emotional as well, and seeing that really like land and sit with people can feel quite special. And it is a specific kind of power as well. And then I'm just like, am I on a power trip? But I think not. I just also quite like opening a space where people can just be like vulnerable for a bit, or just dream a bit, or just imagine things. Because there's a lot of stuff that happens internally that you don't really, maybe share with like your closest friends and family. But I think it's quite powerful to bring a lot of things that are deemed more private into like a public sphere, and to have them just be like part of our everyday reality.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? There's none online currently, but do you want to ask anything, John? Just put you
On the spot.
I do, but I don't, in a way. So I'm gonna pass on that. The question that probably pushes in a direction that would be somewhere else.
Okay. We'll save it for the emails. Yes.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, shall we call it? Yeah, great. Okay, thank
Cool,
you very much.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you as well. Ta-da. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Lucy, for
coming.
inviting me. Thanks, and for doing the tech.
Yes. And so just as a reminder.